Gary, Indiana, huh?
Gary is always in my bones, in my soul. I spent the first 18 years of my life there.
Mm-hmm.
Steel mills, rows of chimneys, not a couple of chimneys. I saw Michael Jackson tribute the other day, and it showed the steel mills in Gary. And I tried to count the smokestacks. There was about 18 in a row. The open hearth furnaces. True grit. Brown Chocolate City, mostly black.
Yeah.
Music center.
What kind of music were you listening to
Oh,
in
I
Gary?
listen. I was a music freak at an early age.
Mm-hmm.
10 o'clock at night, WLAC from Nashville would come on, and I'd stay up most of the night listening to music, blues mostly, rhythm and blues, some country. Gary had several stations. East Chicago had several stations. Chicago had many stations. You could cruise the dial and not get much sleep. I learned about sleep depth as a youth.
So what were your parents like, man? Your family
They
life
split
like?
up when I was young.
Yeah.
My brothers were sent off to military academies, and so I grew up on the streets of Gary pretty much unsupervised, which was an excellent education.
Mm-hmm.
Gary at that time was a multi-ethnic. I think my uncle told me at his high school, Fravel High School, 48 different languages were spoken. People came from all over Eastern Europe, Mexico, Asia to work in the steel mills. It's a great place to grow up. It was tough.
What do you mean tough?
Well, tough as far as it was wide open. It was called the 49th state. There was only 48 states then. There was no Hawaii or Alaska as a state. It was called the region, the 49th state, because it was wide open. It was a boom town. It was lawless. It was just the kind of thing a wild kid looking for action could dream of.
Give me one of those stories that you remember from being a child in Gary that should have showed that wildness you're talking about.
Well, in those days, the, so many ethnic people in Gary that you could be excused from elementary school a couple hours early, a couple of days a week to go to. I went to Greek school. Jewish kids went to. Everybody could go to their school. So to go to Greek school, I had to take the trolley to Midtown, Black Town, colored town, where my grandparents had a grocery store. Right on the corner, it was a ghetto grocery store. And from there, I would walk through the red light district, the black district, to the Greek church, which was in the middle of Midtown Gary. And I heard Hammond B3 organs, I heard street front preachers, I heard, the sounds of crap games, baccarat games, prostitution. I saw street life, and I loved it. I just loved it. I loved all the black guys were the thing. Had a little gold tooth, had a little nice car, nice little pinky diamonds, and flashy clothes, and I thought black people were at the top of the social totem pole until I was 10 years old. My father took me to Florida one winter, and we went through the Alabama in 1950, and I saw how black people were treated there, and it was a disconnect. I mean, I thought the black people were up here and down, and when I went through Alabama, Birmingham, and I saw how black people were treated, and it really defined my sense of justice that I have until this day. My sense of what's right and what's wrong, and my sense of how society is run. Gary, forever with me, every day.
So, what years was
I was
this
born in 1939.
hmm
I graduated from high school in Gary in 1957. I think that's about the year Michael Jackson was born in Gary, about a mile from where I lived. And then I left. I hit the road. I was on the road from 57.
Let's get back to
64.
Gary a little bit.
Okay.
So you were a jock too. You were
I was one of those stories that you hear about nowadays where if a guy's really good at sports, he don't really have to go to school. The coaches and the administrators will sign you up for phantom courses, give you phantom grades to keep you eligible because a winning season was very important. Gary was a huge football town. In those days, it was huge crowds at the games, and they were awesome. They were at night underneath the steel mill and the lights. You could see all the red dust coming down. It was really gritty, and it was a legitimized gang fight, basically. We didn't even have a bar over the helmet. It was one part of town against another part of town, and I loved it.
So did you play with the black kids, or were you segregated at that
It was
time?
segregated,
hmm
yes, which was awful.
Yeah.
Although the school I had played for, I didn't go to very often. I was more culturally black than I was white. Don't forget, ethnic kids in those days were not considered white. You know, I look at some of my high school clippings and see some of the kids, and I say, "Oh, I remember that white kid. I remember that white kid." Well, the ethnics were a little different, and you know, Mexicans were just another ethnicity,
hmm
and
And the Greeks were treated the same way, or?
Greeks were ethnic. Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, Greek was my first language. I spoke Greek before I spoke English. I can still remember it pretty good. When I went to Greece, I got by, did okay with the cab drivers and the relatives. Yeah, my father was born in Greece, so he spoke what we call broken English.
hmm I'm going to stop right there.
Why do you want to do this, Tim? What's in it for you?
What's in it for me? I think just documenting important history and preserving it, and these stories need to be told and not forgotten, I think is one of the main things. And then there is possibility of bucks down the road, but you never know. It's a gamble. But it's mostly, documenting good stories.
Okay.
Yeah. Important to have. It's part of the clan, man. I mean, this neighborhood and everything, and these are stories from here in the Whitaker, and you've been a big part of that, and so have I, and in our little ways, and I think that some of that is forgotten so quickly. I mean,
Yeah, it is.
they don't even know what's
There's
happened
not
here,
even- Nobody's interested. Really.
No, and so I don't know, maybe somewhere down the road, some kid will go through the archives at the university or wherever this shit is and go, what the fuck? So who knows? Who's know what's going to stick? I mean, we're just here for a short
I
time,
understand.
man. Plus, we're friends, so this is something that we do for each other, man.
Thank you.
So anyway, Gary, anything else
Gary
on
at that
Gary,
time
man?
was the largest steel mill in the whole world. It was built by Andrew Carnegie
Mm-hmm.
on the south side of Chicago. It was the big sand dunes, just like we have here at Florence. And Gary was Andrew Carnegie's right-hand man, his bookkeeper. So the steel mill was built in 1906, and it serviced the First World War, serviced the Second World War, and then it basically started shutting down, and now they call it part of the Rust Belt, all of the heavy industry got shipped off, and now Gary is one of the biggest crime zone ghettos in the USA. It's really tough. It's right on the south side of Chicago. It's right on the border of Indiana, Illinois. From my house to South Chicago, where all the blues joints were that I love so much, was about 10 miles. Calumet City, where all the blues joints and all the conventioneers went, was real close. And you could steal a car real easy in those days.
How would you do it?
Well, the ignition switch was unsophisticated in the 50s, especially the early 50s. You could take a piece of tinfoil, which you got off of chewing gum wrappers or cigarette package wrappers, and put it behind the ignition and jump the poles, and you could drive away with some real nice rides.
When was the first time you ever did that? How old were you?
I was probably 13. I wanted to go hear the music. I wanted to go see the people in the street. I wanted to explore all of South Chicago, which in those days was beautiful.
So you took the ride to Chicago when you stole a car at 13 to listen to the blues players?
Pretty much.
Yeah, yeah. So
At around, well, my brother bought a car when he was 16 for $100, 38 Chevy. And then when he was shipped away to private military academy, the car was sitting there, and I was only 14, but I had his driver's license and that car. So when I got 14, I was legit. I had a fake ID, my brother's driver's license, and I had a car registered to that ID. And gas was 29 cents a gallon. And South Chicago was full of blues joints. You gotta understand, the black immigration came from the South, really huge after the Second World War. So many black veterans came back after, putting their life on the line, came back to Jim Crow, and especially in the South, and it was awful. So they came up north to work in the steel mills and to be free.
speaking of your brother, tell me something about your family dynamic. What's up there?
My father was born in Greece. He came to this country through Ellis Island when he was about 14. My mother was born in Gary. My father was Gary City fireman. He started as a rookie, fire at the bottom, and he ended up after 30-some years on the Gary Fire Department, became a battalion chief. Understand, fires in Gary were big deals because they were chemical fires and oil and coal, and it was very dangerous work, very toxic situation you're working in. My father and mother had 3 children. I'm the middle son of 3 sons. I pretty much grew up alone because my brothers were away and my parents were separated, and I was unaccountable. I had a lot of freedom, a lot of latitude to pretty much do whatever I wanted, which in those days was explore.
Rotate back.
My uncle had a tavern, and I had a car, and I worked in the tavern as 12, 13-year-old kid, shining shoes, mopping floors. So I always had a lot of alcohol. And I had a trunk full of whiskey and beer from my uncle's tavern. So when you're going through neighborhoods in South Chicago, it's kind of like having a passport. If you have some booze and you got good tunes playing on your radio, you're not going to get hurt as likely as if you're walking.
And how old were you then when you were
I was
cruising?
14.
14, wow. Yeah.
And then you bought marijuana in a nickel PA can. You went looking for a nickel PA can. Well, nickel meant $5. A PA can was a little oval tin where they put tobacco in. Prince Albert.
Hmm.
In fact, we used to do phone cranks and call up the grocery store. Do you have Prince Albert in the can? They'd say, yeah. Well, let him out. His mama's calling for him. See, you know, kids. But you get a nickel PA can of some leafy brown Mexican stuff that you hyperventilated on as much as you got stoned. But you had to really know where to go to get it.
Right. So Gary, what made you leave Gary?
Well, when I got out of high school, it was either the steel mills, the army, or the mob, the family, the syndicate. And to me, they were all like going to jail. Whether you go in the steel mill, which was very dangerous, very dirty and very hot, or the army. I saw my brothers in military academy, and I wasn't for being in a formation before breakfast and yes sir, no sir. I was anti-authoritarian and anti-militaristic. So I just hit the road. My mom said I was a tumbleweed. I just would go, and who knows where. I just take off and not even knowing which direction I was going to go. I would just go whichever directions were open. In 1959, I spent the summer in San Francisco. Then I was up in the first Winter Olympics in California was held in Squaw Valley in 1960. They had the Winter Olympics there. And I watched them carry the torch, the Olympic torch, to Squaw Valley, which is an interesting story. But then I went to Mexico City, hitchhiked, took the people's buses, which I loved the Mexican people. In 1959 it was beautiful. Then I went to Fairbanks, Alaska, fighting forest fires. I was just loose until I met Deanna. We got married and had children, but the draft was the boogeyman in those days. I lived in fear of getting drafted, as many guys did, because many people did a lot of things to avoid the draft. Muhammad Ali said he was a conscientious objector, but I didn't want to go in the military. And so, in order to get out of the draft, you could get a deferment if you went to college. So whenever the draft got hot on my neck, I would jump into the nearest local university. I went to school in Illinois, I went to the University of Nevada, Mexico City College. I went to many, many different universities, and eventually I had been to so many to avoid the draft that I was close to getting a degree. And I got a degree, and that's when I got married, and we had started having children, and I had to get a job. Finally, when I was 25 years old, I really had my first job. That wasn't just a pickup job.
Right.
Bartender, short order cook, dish dog, whatever it takes to get you to the next town.
Well, let's go back a little bit. I want you to rotate again, Victor. There you go. Go back a little bit to your traveling days. I mean, Mexico, and where that was like the beatnik days too. So is there anything connected with that?
Well,
Jack Kerouac or anything like that? Or any influences?
Kerouac wrote On the Road in '59, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I hit the road in about '57, and one thing people don't understand, they hear about the '60s and dissent, and the groundswell of dissent that was happening in the 60s, but that happened all in the 50s too. There was a people on the road when I would get on a boxcar. First came to Oregon on a freight train in a boxcar, and people would they were riding the rails and jungle up in little hobo jungles, and I did that. I spent a lot of time riding freight trains. I found it, it suited me fine.
Mm-hmm.
And there's people that, things were changing in the 50s. Rhythm and blues, the music was getting strong, and there was a lot of mix between ethnic groups and classes those days, because not everybody just wanted to move to the suburbs and get a station wagon and do that 50s things. There was a lot of people that wanted to find something different from that. Not sure what, it wasn't clear yet what an alternative or what a counter to that culture was. But I was definitely out there looking for something different than that.
So post World War II, ticky-tacky little houses, suburbs. I mean, what was that like, that transition into that world from World War II, the suburbs, and because you don't really hear too much conflict about what you're talking about, like people.
There's a lot of conflict that you don't hear about.
Yeah, yeah.
It sounds like Johnny came marching home from the Second World War, and everybody was peace and love, and they got heroes welcome. That's not the complete picture, especially if you were poor and black or poor and ethnic. You came back and the war machine was shutting down. Don't forget what President Franklin Roosevelt saw the role of the United States during the Second World War as being an arsenal to the world. He used that word. Don't forget, we were supplying both the Nazi fascists and the British Empire with armaments and making a big buck off of it. And the steel mills were booming. Women were working jobs in the open hearth steel mill, tough jobs. But then when these veterans started coming back, it displaced everything. The women, didn't really have their jobs anymore. These people went down south where the racist Jim Crow establishment was really cracking down. So there was a lot of discord. There was a lot of wondering what's next. And actually, when I look at it over my 75-year span now, right after the Second World War was kind of the height of the American Empire. And then I've been witness to the long, slow descent to this day, 2014, when we're overreaching and all over the world. Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, forget about it. The empire has now just become a power-drunk, dangerous, criminal nation, USA. And it's taken us a long time to get here, but I've seen it in my lifetime. The height of the Second World War, now it's the middle of June, you hear a lot about D-Day, and it makes it look like the Americans went over there and saved Europe from the Nazi. They say Nazi, they don't say fascist, but it's really a fascist regime, which isn't really truly the case, The more accurate representation of D-Day, I think it happened in 1944 in June, the longest day or something like that, that they deified now. But Winston Churchill and President Roosevelt delayed that D-Day invasion for a long time because they were enjoying watching the Russians defeat Hitler in Stalingrad and on the Western Front. It was really the Russians who won the Second World War, not the D-Day Americans that invaded France on the beaches of Normandy. I think the Russians lost something like 28 million
Citizens?
and I think that was just army guys. When you start counting all their women and children, it goes way over 28 million. And I think the United States in the Second World War lost 400,000 or something. I'm not sure the number. But
What was it like back in the 50s if you started getting political and stuff in the late 50s or something? Were you hearing much about communism? And I mean, you're hearing a lot about it, but there
Yes.
in the 30s and early
Yes.
40s, there was a lot of people shifting,
well, in the
writers and
20s too.
liberals.
You
And,
gotta understand, you can't understand my 75-year span of history without understanding the rise and fall of the American Empire, and you can't understand the rise and fall of the American Empire without understanding the history of Russia, because they're inextricably connected. Because in 1917, during the First World War, that was really a fight amongst squabbling cousins, all the different kingdoms, and they all had kings, but they were all kind of relatives. They started squabbling. The Tsar in Russia was a cousin of the German, you know, what they call them, the German.
Prime Minister or
No,
no?
they had a name for them. They weren't called kings.
Yeah, was it Prussia and
You know, they're all basically kingdoms. 1917, I think it was. It might have been 1914, but the Bolsheviks and the head of Russian Revolution, and basically in the First World War, these Russian soldiers said, "We're tired of being your chumps and dying here for nothing. We quit." And they threw down their guns and their uniforms, and they went back home and basically did in the Tsar of Russia. And they were called Bolsheviks. It was the Russian Revolution. And to understand the history of my 75 period, you really got to understand, which I'm just learning about, I'm trying to research more, about the worldwide response to this Russian Revolution. The whole world at that time turned against these people who turned out the Tsar. And even America, Woodrow Wilson, our president, who was supposed to be a peacenik, well, everybody sent united behind sending armies to destroy the Russian Revolution. And it was attacked by all the European nations, it was attacked on the West, it was attacked by Japan in the East, it was attacked by everybody, because this notion of egalitarianism, this notion of people deciding for themselves instead of being just pawns of some ruler, had international and worldwide appeal. And they didn't want that to spread because the rulers wanted to keep the clamps down on the little people. And so the rulers from all over the world, no matter what their ideology, united and are united to this day to stop the spread of so-called communism, which comes from the word commune, which comes from the word of people in community deciding their own affairs, and democracy believing that people are basically born good and can think for themselves and decide for themselves and rule for themselves through discussion and through consensus.
But then you were growing up in the 50s when there was the Cold War and
Well, let me tell you a little bit about my mother.
okay.
Because my mother, to understand what happened in America, you got to understand the name Henry Wallace. Henry Wallace was what the prime architect of what was known during after the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt, the New Deal. There was a stock market manipulation, greed, just like there is these days in the 20s after their Gilded Age, and it crashed, and Franklin Roosevelt bailed out the banks just like Obama has, but then he also did what is called a New Deal. He started public works projects. Timberline Lodge was built by it. Many things were roads, bridges, parks were built by the New Deal. Henry Wallace was the vice president for Franklin Roosevelt. And my mother my first political awareness was in 1944, which I was 5 years old. I was born in 39. And he ran for office, and my mother had me putting Henry Wallace door hangers on doors. Well, my mother was sent hate mail, phone calls. Her life was threatened. Somebody threw a can of red paint because it was the Red Scare, the red of communism on our house. We were completely intimidated, and the communists were the so-called boogeyman, like the so-called terrorists are now. And so I learned from an early age that dissent is not really tolerated in our country. Take a break, huh?
So where'd you want? Let me do one
Let
other.
me tell you,
Yeah. So where do you want to go, man?
well, when I look at the 75-year span that I'm a witness to, I realize I have a great love and appreciation for what we might want to just call the common people or working class people or, regular folk. Regular, you can call them poor, middle class, or whatever, but I have seen so much beauty and art and altruism amongst people that I have just bumped into that it's inspiring to me to this day. And there's a lot of unsung heroes, and one of the problems I think with the technology in the society today is it gets identified as a single solitary person. There's like the cult of personality, and one person is great and this, but I've really met some wonderful people, and I've met some great people, and they were the great people that I've met had really wonderful people around them, from whether it's Wayne Morse or Ken Kesey or Andrew Weil or any really extraordinary people that I've met. They have not been ego and minded and wanted an entourage around and all this glitz and bling, and they're really inspiring.
Well, talking about the blue collar workers, and where'd you start getting that from? Was that at Gary, or was that your travels,
yeah.
or?
I'm very much still a Gary person. They talk about the formative years, and when I got a master's degree in psychology, I thought it was all a lot of baloney, but now I really believe that those first years of your life, not just birth to 3, but probably all the way up until when you're 14, 15 years old, are really imprint years that the rest of our life we act out those imprints.
Yeah, we're gonna stop right there just for a second.
Imprints.
Well, I want to ask you one question that we were talking about earlier. It's just like, why are you doing this interview at all? What's your purpose?
Well, my purpose is I have 6 grandchildren. And I didn't really know my grandparents. My father's father lived in the old country, and he never came to America. I never met him. My maternal grandfather died when I was very young. And I volunteered for 5 years at Adams Elementary School and kind of became a school grandfather. And what I learned was that hardly any kids knew their grandfather. And so I'm putting together some charts in my family archives for my grandchildren to kind of know what I was like, what I believed in, what my values were, what their grandmother was like, what their fathers were like when they were their age. I think we don't put perspective on life, you know. In today's technology, anything historical is fuddly and dudley or old-fashioned and not really relevant, which isn't the truth at all. We are an extension of the past. Sure, we have some freedom to change things, but also we have DNA, we have cultural history that we're acting out. And so I'm doing this for my grandchildren. When they get a little older, they can see what I was like, what my values were, what I believed in, how I led my life, and that I, think that it's important that kids know where they're coming from. So this is a narrative for my grandchildren, that all these charts and the archives that I'm putting together. Someday they might get lost, but if they don't, they might be of some value to them. Because it's going to be really tough when they get to be older, because this empire is crumbling so fast. They are going to be reaping the dregs of the awful trail that the United States of America has left upon this planet. And it's going to be tough. There aren't going to be the jobs, the opportunities, the food, shelter, transpo, family connections that were available before are drying up really fast. And it's going to be really tough for younger kids to find a way and to decide who they are and what they can do, because it's going to seem hopeless, it's going to seem difficult, as it does for any generations. How do you bust up out of this and do something good? But it's going to be increasingly difficult as the banks fail and the government completely disintegrates, and money's going to be tight. In personal relationships are very difficult. The technology has counted a screen as a relationship, and the youth are at quite a disadvantage of how to cope with the events that are coming to fore. And if this in some small way helps them to deal with the very difficult situation that I imagine coming, then that's what I'm doing it for.
Well, what would you tell these kids? What do you think they should do?
Well, on this chart, you're going to notice I have the final panel is the 2020. Okay, given this trajectory of the American Empire, and we're here at 2015, what, given that trajectory, can we guess or speculate that the next 5 years are going to be like, and how can we prepare for that? Because there's no preparation being made. And to go into a situation unprepared is to be really handicapped. And so the back panel is the 5-year plan, I think, of what some skills that will be prerequisites to survival in the dregs of the American empire.
What are some of those?
Well, I think they start with start small and grow with your neighborhood, with your family, with your neighbors, getting beyond ideology, getting beyond ethnicity. Race is a bogus category anyway. There's no such thing as black, white, yellow, whatever they call them as race. There are different ethnicities, there are different cultures, there are different value systems. And so I think in the future, those value systems will, with the decline of all the institutions, will have to be neighborhood based. You know, you're going to have to buddy up with your neighbor no matter what they look like, whatever they believe in. They're who you're in it with. And so you better figure out a way to handle, because otherwise you're going to fall apart. So I think it starts in neighborhood, you know, starts with your neighbors, starts with some inventory of what is available. What are the businesses in this neighborhood? What are the schools in this neighborhood? What are the parks in this neighborhood? What are the families? What are the talents of the people in this neighborhood? And begin to pool those resources and somehow survive. It maybe won't be dropping bombs on us like in the Ukraine and Afghanistan, Iraq, everywhere else, but they're psychological bombs, emotional bombs, cultural bombs being detonated daily, interpersonal bombs where people can't relate and can't talk, can't listen, can't discuss without losing their cool. These are severe handicaps that even though you may have a handheld screen device that has all the technology, still you will be greatly handicapped without these social and street skills. These are not skills learned in the university or in books. Stop.
That was awesome.
Alley right here. My first game was the Madison Alley Rats. MAR, bruh.
When was that?
That must have been 1954, 53.
Yeah. Hmm.
The Madison Alley Rats. Yeah, I think it's going to be really tough for these young people.
Yeah.
You know, they got no street smarts. They're all isolated and individuated.
Yeah, I'm really concerned about,
Yeah.
I've been living with these kids, my daughter and her friends and Eileen's boys, and they're pretty clueless, man.
They're really clueless.
They communicate strictly through texting. No face to face.
No
Break
face-to-face.
up, texting, fight,
I think just a
texting.
no face to face is a bomb, ticking bomb.
Mm-hmm.
There's no light, is there?
Just enough.
Is there?
Just barely.
Oh, that camera's
Yeah.
you really picking it up, huh?
Yeah, it's not too bad.
What's a camera like that cost?
This is pretty cheap.
Like,
Well, this is a high-end camera back in, a few years ago, but now the technology is shifting so quickly that the new brands come out and these drop in price considerably. I don't know, man, $1,000, But it is a trick.
where do you want to go with this?
Well, I don't know. Let's have you get up and walk out toward the living room and go out the front door. I want to get a shot of you doing that.
Walking there,
Yeah,
coming in.
just walking out and coming back, dude, and
Okay.
sitting down. Go ahead. And whenever you feel
I got a nice crib, huh?
it. Yeah, you do. That's good. You can come on back.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Talk about stagey, huh?
That's it. Still in the hood, 40 years later. I'll give you a rap about the Blair neighborhood.
Well, yeah, we're gonna get all there. What kind of rap about the Blair neighborhood?
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm 4 blocks away from 3 buildings that I owned in the early 70s, which is 40 years ago. I owned 3 buildings there. I had a picture of the Red Barn, George's Garage, and an ice cream parlor in those days. I own those buildings because I was a neighborhood activist, and I believe that neighborhoods were the way to go in America today. I had been at the university working on my PhD, and I didn't like it. I thought it was bogus. I didn't see it going anywhere. I wanted to be not an academic, but involved with the people issues, and that was in the early 70s. Eugene was a gathering point for many, we'll call them refugees from the 60s. The 60s not only had all the assassinations you might know about, from Malcolm X to Martin King to Bobby Kennedy to Jack Kennedy to all the Panthers, many American Indian movement people. But after the clampdown of the 60s, the coup d'etat, Wayne Morse was run out of office. Wayne Morse came back to Oregon. Ken Kesey had been down in the Bay Area and got ripped off by Hollywood for Sometimes a Great Notion and this great book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He came back. Andrew Weil had just graduated from Harvard Medical School, had written a book, The Natural Mind, had traveled all over South America and Asia looking for herbal doctors, curanderos. He came here to see what was going on. I came from Washington, D.C. with my wife and 3 kids. I could see that the Nixon era was shutting down any kind of programs for regular working people, the War on Poverty, the Office of Economic Opportunity, all of the social uplifting programs were being shut down. So I came here. People came here from all over. I think the Hodads, they were a tree planting cooperative. They had people from something like 25 states were in the Hodads. So I believe then and I believe now, probably with more definite notions, that neighborhood is where it has to begin. Change is bottom up. Corruption is top down. Change is bottom up. Unless you understand that axiom, you're not going to get very far in understanding what is happening. You look at the last 40 years, what has happened to this Blair neighborhood, which was always a blue-collar, working-class neighborhood. The barn was a feed and seed store. Sam Bond's garage not only worked on cars, but tractors and implements and, plows and anything. This was the neighborhood that serviced all of the truck farms and the small farms in River Road, Santa Clara area, which was a huge bread basket not only for the whole state, for the country. I think there was something like 28 canneries in the Willamette Valley. There were something like 25 or 30 grain mills. And things changed, and the family farm and the canneries all turned into grass seed growers for golf courses all over the world. And now is projected for the Blair neighborhood to be what I call the spigot and trough neighborhood. Lots of bars, restaurants. There's so many alcoholic outlets, I call them spigots. And they all have catering to what we might call yups or young urban professionals or anyway, the trajectory is to gentrify, to move out all the poor, regular, working class people and move in yuppies, urban, professional, affluent, more affluent people, and where they have these nice restaurants and fermentation district, they call it, and handcrafted beers and wines, etc., etc. And where these people can come and entertain themselves and be served by service workers, minimum wage people, cooks, waiters, waitresses, baristas, dish dogs, all basically at minimum wage. And that formula don't fly. It's not gonna fly. Those people who are gonna be working for those minimum wages, they can't afford their rents around here anymore. They're being displaced. It's all in flux. And it's all dependent on yuppies having ever more money. And I don't think that's going to be happening because that's largely centered around the university, which is not going to continue its expansion of rich, indefinite supply of rich college kids. So what is the future of this neighborhood that's been around here for a long time? And
Stop there.